Tactical Talk. This is Zain. Today, the topic of our show is the US strikes on Syria and their aftermath. Today, the guest of our show is Alex Christoforou, the writer and director for The Duran, theduran.com. Welcome to our show, Alex Christoforou. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Alex, let's get to the first question. There are two narratives as to why the U.S. striked the Assad regime. One is a Western narrative and the other is a Syrian narrative. Would you please elaborate both of those narratives?
Okay, well, the Western narrative is kind of a repeat of the narrative we've been seeing play over and over again, and that narrative has to do with chemical weapons attacks. Assad, once again, has to be the dumbest dictator on the planet because as he's winning the war and he's clearing cities of jihadists and terrorists, he decides to gas his own people. Because being the dumbest dictator on the planet, he wants to invite the U.S. to come in and thwart his victory over jihadists, which he's been fighting for the last 6-7 years. So the Western narrative is pretty much trying to sell people into buying what really is an absolutely ridiculous and nonsensical story. Now the Syrian narrative is obviously the narrative that the U.S. does not want to leave Syria. It wants to continue the proxy war that they funded from the beginning. It's now pretty much common knowledge that the U.S. has been funding ISIS in Syria on the one hand and fighting ISIS in Iraq on the other. And all of this is to keep Syria bogged down, to keep Russia bogged down. And of course, there's the ancillary benefit of helping Israel to thwart what is really an imaginary expansion of Iran close to Israel's borders. So I mean, there's a lot of different moving pieces at play, but the basic Syrian narrative is that the U.S. does not want a quick end to the war. It doesn't want an end to the war. That Assad has essentially won. Even U.S. generals admit that Assad has won that war, but the U.S. is reluctant to concede.
Alex, let's get to a very important question. When the U.S. striked Syria, there was a lot of news coming out of Syria that most of the missiles fired by the U.S. coalition were actually intercepted by Russian missile defense systems. Is that true? And also, how much damage was actually done by the U.S. strikes on Syria?
Well, this is an interesting question. It's kind of a back and forth between what Syria and Russian military defense says and what, of course, the Pentagon has stated. Of course, the Pentagon and Trump as well, in one of his famous tweets, said that it was mission accomplished. The strikes were 100% success. The Pentagon said that they launched 100 plus missiles on 3 targets. And every single one of them achieved its goal and debilitated what was Syrian chemical weapons factories. Chemical weapons factories that, the last 6-7 years in this war that has been taking place. Now the U.S. has suddenly found these chemical factories that are producing these chemical weapons, and they just now decided to take them out of the blue. Of course, the Russian military defense and the Syrian government say that they intercepted around 70 of those missiles. Even if you say that the truth lies somewhere in the middle, what it does show is that the Pentagon's attack on Syria was not a 100% success and an equivocal mission accomplished as Trump touted. And it also shows another thing. It shows that the U.S. targeted not 3 locations. They probably targeted more than a dozen or 24 locations. And my hunch is, and from a lot of the data that has been out there, is that many of those locations, the strikes were an abject failure. and the Soviet-style defense that Syria has. These are systems from the Soviet era, did their job, and there were only 3 targets that were actually destroyed by the U.S. military. If you believe the U.S. military's words, then it means that on one missile strike alone, they sent 76 missiles on one target. That sounds just absolutely ridiculous and reckless to bombard one target with 76 missiles. So it's most likely the scenario that the U.S. launched a pretty wide and varied attack on Syria, and many of those targets that it launched that attack against were defended successfully. So I think it's somewhere. The truth lies somewhere over there.
Alex, as you were saying in one of your previous answers, that ISIS and other rebel groups were defeated by the Syrians and their allies, but after the US strikes on Syria, we've seen that ISIS and other rebel groups have started gaining ground in Syria. Do you see ISIS and other groups actually becoming stronger in Syria and other regions after the US strikes?
Well, no one really knows what's going to happen in much of the territory in Syria, most of it in the east. One thing's for sure is that Assad has won the war, and he has secured the major populous areas in Syria. Those are under Syrian government control, and ISIS has been defeated in most of the major population areas of Syria. Now, you have the U.S., which is setting up. They already have set up essentially a base in Syria. This is illegal. The U.S. was never invited into Syria, so under international law, this is an invasion and an occupation, strictly speaking. So, you have the U.S. now operating within Syrian borders, and of course you have Israel and Qatar, who along with the U.S. Have been funding and bankrolling various ISIS offshoot groups or ISIS themselves within Syria. Whether you'll see a resurgence of ISIS jihadists once again attacking the populous areas of Syria, I don't think so. You'll probably see a lot of skirmishes in and around these eastern provinces, all the way up to where the U.S. base is located. Whether the U.S. is going to continue funding ISIS in the area is a question mark. That lies with Trump, and as we know, Trump is a pretty unpredictable character. We've heard that he's actually thinking about stopping funding for the White Helmets, which is essentially the PR group for ISIS. So we've heard rumors that he's going to be cutting White Helmets off, and much of ISIS is defeat in Iraq was due to Trump not really defeating ISIS militarily. It was just cutting off a lot of funding to certain jihadist groups within the region. Now the question remains, is he going to totally cut off the funding of those jihadist groups in Syria? That remains to be seen, but I don't see the main population areas in Syria coming under any real threat from ISIS in the short to medium term.
Alex, speaking of the U.S. strikes on Syria, recently Israel has also started to bomb different Syrian positions with their fighter jets. How does this affect the future of the region?
Well, it complicates things, obviously. Pulling out of the Iran deal just adds, the U.S. pulling out of the Iran deal just adds a lot more complication to an already destabilized part of the world. It really is a tinderbox. And so, Israel now has taken it upon itself to launch strikes within Syria. Once again, these are illegal strikes, and they they go against all the norms of international law. But Israel's excuse now is not so much Assad must go, though they still, would prefer Assad to go. But, Israel's excuse for striking within Syria is to attack Iran. And so their goal is, or at least what they're saying, is that they're striking within Syria so as to prevent Iran from gaining a foothold in Syria, which for Israel means that they're going to be within striking distance to launch an attack against Israel. It's no secret that Iran and Russia played a pivotal role in rescuing Assad from near defeat and then propelling Assad along with the Syrian army, to victory in the 6-7 year war against ISIS and the jihadists. Now, Israel, launching attacks in Syria under the guise that they're trying to thwart Iran's expansion is obviously a flat out lie. More than anything, I think Israel and the United States are once again looking to keep the Syria destabilized. The last thing they want, I think, is a stable Assad Syria. And with that, you may be looking at the beginnings of maybe, I hope not, at least maybe a wider attack against Iran or something coming up against Iran. It remains to be seen, but if that was to happen, you'd be looking at a very dangerous and potentially a very widening war, not only in the region, but maybe even globally.
Alex, let's get to the last question, and this is one of my favorites. A lot of journalists have, asked me personally and, in public, if I think that Russia has done enough for Syria in the region. I'd like to ask you the same question because I'm also trying to figure out the geopolitics at the moment. What is your opinion? Has Russia done enough for the region and Syria in particular in the Middle East, North Africa at the moment?
I think Russia actually, they spelled out their mission. They were very clear in what they wanted to accomplish, and they accomplished it. Unlike the United States, I think Russia, set out a plan, a very detailed plan as to what their mission was in Syria, and their mission was never to get bogged down in a bigger, wider conflict. Their mission was never to be permanently based in Syria. A large military force permanently based in Syria fighting against ISIS, the jihadists, and maybe within even a wider conflict that could involve Israel, Iran, Turkey, etc. So I think Russia, on the one hand, they spelled out their military objectives very clearly, and for the most part, they achieved those military objectives. And they also worked the diplomatic front brilliantly. And they managed to keep all the different factions and all the different goals that many leaders had within Syria, whether it was to keep Assad in power or to destabilize Assad. And you had Netanyahu, you had Erdogan, you had the United States from Obama to now Trump. You had Qatar, you had Saudi Arabia. And Russia played a pivotal role, and they worked the diplomatic channels brilliantly to make sure that a wider conflict did not erupt, while at the same time preserving Syria, the Syrian state, and preserving Assad's leadership within Syria. So I think, without a doubt, this was a military and diplomatic victory for Russia, and it's not over yet. And I think Russia realizes that there's a way to go to stabilize the situation, but for the most part, they have a clear understanding of what they want to accomplish in Syria.
Thank you so much, Alex Christoforou, for being on Tactical Talk. It's always a pleasure having you.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
This was Alex Christoforou, the writer and director for The Duran, theduran.com. We were discussing the US strikes on Syria and their aftermath. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain. Take care and goodbye.